In the history of Nigeria, there is a name that tells the story before the man even opens his mouth. Goodluck. And for a long time, that is exactly what it seemed like he had. It started with nothing. No powerful family, no political godfather, no silver spoon. A boy from a small fishing community in Bayelsa state, who wore no shoes to school. He would later say that himself, proudly. And that same boy rose to become the president of the most populous black nation on earth. The first president in Nigerian history to hold a PhD. So, how does a man with that kind of story, that kind of journey, end up losing everything in one night? And why is he now thinking about going back? That is what we are going to break down today.
Goodluck Jonathan of PDP scored 22,495,187.
To understand Goodluck Jonathan, you need to understand where he came from. Bayelsa State, one of the smallest states in Nigeria, tucked away in the Niger Delta, a region sitting on some of the most valuable oil deposits in the world, while the people living above that oil remain some of the poorest in the country. Jonathan grew up in that contradiction. He studied, earned a BSc, then an MSc, then a PhD in zoology from the University of Port Harcourt. In a country where most politicians never finish secondary school, this man had a doctorate. But education alone doesn't hand you power in Nigeria. You need the right moment, and Jonathan's moment kept coming. In 1999, he became deputy governor of Bayelsa State under Governor Dapriye Alamesie, a man who seemed untouchable until he wasn't. In 2005, Alamesie was arrested in London on money laundering charges. He was impeached, and just like that, Goodluck Jonathan became the governor of Bayelsa State. He didn't campaign for it. He didn't fight for it. It came to him just like that. Then, it happened again. In 2007, President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua was looking for a running mate. Jonathan's name came up. There was resistance. Powerful voices in the People's Democratic Party said a southern minority from Bayelsa had no business being that close to the presidency. Nigeria's unwritten power rotation rules were complicated. The North was supposed to produce the president. A southern vice president from a small minority group felt like too much to some people, but the decision was made. Jonathan became vice president, and in 2010, lightning struck again. Yar'Adua fell ill, seriously ill. He was flown to Saudi Arabia for medical treatment. And for months, Nigeria had a president who had disappeared. No formal handover of power, no clear line of authority. The country was drifting. And inside the PDP, the People's Democratic Party, the battle over what to do was vicious. Some powerful politicians did not want Jonathan to take over. Northern power brokers who had invested in Yar'Adua's presidency were not ready to hand the keys to a man from Bayelsa. But a group of senators and politicians pushed back very hard. They invoked what became known as the Doctrine of Necessity, a constitutional argument that allowed the National Assembly to recognize Jonathan as acting president, even without a formal letter from Yar'Adua. Senators like David Mark stood firmly behind the process. The Senate voted. Jonathan was sworn in as acting president in February 2010.
Nigeria's acting president Goodluck Jonathan has been sworn in as head of state following the death of President Omar Yar'Adua after a long illness.
Now, when Yar'Adua died in May 2010, Goodluck Jonathan became the substantive president of Nigeria. A boy who once had no shoes was now sitting in Aso Villa. And in 2011, he went for it himself. He ran for president and he won in an election that was widely praised as one of the most credible in Nigerian history. Professor Atahiru Jega led the Independent National Electoral Commission at that time. Card readers were introduced, results were collated more transparently than Nigerians had seen in a long time. Jonathan won, And for a brief moment, hope was in the air. His administration had genuine achievements. The economy grew. Nigeria rebased its GDP and became the largest economy in Africa, overtaking South Africa for the first time. The entertainment industry, Nollywood, boomed. He invested in power sector reforms, privatized the electricity distribution companies, trying to fix a problem that had strangled Nigeria for decades. The UN program gave grants to young entrepreneurs. The Sovereign Wealth Fund was established. Roads, bridges, and federal projects moved across the country. And Jonathan himself was accessible in a way Nigerian presidents rarely are. He had a Facebook page. He engaged online. He took interviews. He appeared in public without the cold, untouchable distance that many Nigerian leaders wrap themselves in. But the one that stayed with people was the presidential media chat, a live national broadcast where Jonathan sat before the cameras and took calls and questions directly from ordinary Nigerians. Live, unscripted, real people, real questions, real time. I remember watching that as a young boy and feeling something I had never quite felt watching a Nigerian president before. That this man actually wanted to hear from us. A sitting president of Nigeria on national television, picking up the phone, listening to citizens. I know this may sound simple, but in Nigeria, this was extraordinary. For the first time, it felt like a human being was the president of the country. But then came the shadows, and they were long. His aviation minister, Stella Odua, became the face of everything wrong with his administration. A scandal erupted over the purchase of 2 armored BMW cars for her ministry. Cars that cost over 255 million naira of public funds for an aviation minister. Nigerians were furious. The National Assembly moved to probe her, and Jonathan kept her in the cabinet far longer than he should have. It sent a message, not the message he intended, but nothing defined Jonathan's presidency more painfully than the one night in April 2014. Chibok, a small town in Borno State. 276 schoolgirls abducted from their school dormitory by Boko Haram in the middle of the night. Gone. The world was watching. Bring Back Our Girls became a global movement. Michelle Obama held up a sign. Celebrities, world leaders, ordinary people, everywhere, all demanding action. And Jonathan's government was slow, painfully, inexplicably slow. He did not visit Chibok, not once. His initial response felt distant, bureaucratic, disconnected. For a president who prided himself on being a man of the people, it was a catastrophic failure of empathy, and Nigerians never forget it. Boko Haram had been growing throughout his administration. Attacks were escalating. Communities in the northeast were being overrun. Soldiers were poorly equipped. Morale in the military was collapsing, and stories were emerging of troops fleeing rather than fighting. Not because they were cowards, but because they had been sent to war without the tools to fight one. The insecurity consumed everything. By 2015, Nigeria was ready for a change. And the coalition of opposition parties had done something unprecedented. They had united. The All Progressive Congress, the APC, brought together former rivals under one platform. They had a candidate, Muhammadu Buhari, a former military ruler, a northern anti-corruption in image. Everything Jonathan was not. The election was coming and the tension was suffocating. Violence was threatened. International observers were nervous. The stakes felt existential. And then came the moment that many Nigerians consider Jonathan's greatest act. The results came in. Buhari had won. And before the official announcement was even made, Goodluck Jonathan picked up the phone and called Muhammadu Buhari to concede. In a country where incumbents had never lost, in a continent where leaders clung to power with everything they had, Jonathan called his opponent, congratulated him, and let go. Quietly, peacefully, completely. His exact words became famous. My ambition is not worth the blood of any Nigerian.
No matter our ambitions, we should not sacrifice the life of Nigerians. That nobody's ambition Even if you want to be 20 presidents of this country, your ambition is not worth the blood of any Nigerian.
The world noticed. Kofi Annan praised him. Barack Obama praised him. African leaders praised him. Because in that moment, Goodluck Jonathan did something that almost no African leader before him had done voluntarily. He chose his country over his chair. And just like that, he was gone. From the villa, from the power, from the center, a man who had risen from bare feet to the presidency stepped aside. But Nigeria being Nigeria, the story was not over, because in the years that followed, something interesting began happening. As Buhari's administration struggled with its own failure, as the economy contracted and insecurity worsened, Nigerians began doing something unexpected. They started remembering Jonathan differently, not as the president who lost, but as the president who conceded. Not as the man who failed on Chibok, but as the man who called Buhari. Nostalgia is a powerful thing. And in Nigeria, in 2022 and 2023, Goodluck Jonathan nostalgia was very real. His name began circulating, quietly at first, then louder. Reports emerged that Jonathan was considering a political comeback under the PDP ahead of the 2027 elections, a return to Aso Villa, not as a man running from something, but as a man who believes Nigeria needs him again, even though his wife thinks otherwise. Whether Nigeria agrees remains to be seen. So, here's what I want you to take away from this story. Goodluck Jonathan is one of the most complicated figures in modern Nigerian history. He was not the worst president Nigeria ever had. He was not the best. He was a man of genuine intelligence and humble origins who got to the top of the most difficult country in Africa and found that getting there was easier than knowing what to do once you arrived. The Chibok girls deserved better from him. The soldiers fighting Boko Haram deserved better. The Nigerians watching corruption flourish around him deserved even better. But the man who picked up that phone in 2015 and called his opponent gave Nigeria something it had never had before, a proof of concept that power could change hands peacefully, and the sitting president could lose and walk away. That one phone call may be the most important thing Goodluck Jonathan did for Nigeria. More important than any policy, more important than any project, more important than any speech. He showed Nigeria what was possible, and Nigeria is still figuring out what to do with that gift. If this story made you think, there are more like it on this channel. Real history, broken down simply. Subscribe and don't miss the next one.